Welcome to the Stronger for Business podcast with Dyfrig Jenkins, Pete Rushmer, and myself, Bev Thorogood. Stronger for Business is a training consortium dedicated to bringing high-quality training solutions to businesses through the combined expertise of our partners. From skills training to developing personal and professional excellence, our mission is to help business owners get the very best from their people at all levels, from boardroom to shop floor. The Stronger for Business podcast is our opportunity to share our knowledge, thoughts and ideas with you, the listener. You'll get to meet some awesome guests from across the business world, sharing their experience of learning and development. If you love what we have to say, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to consume your podcasts so you don't miss out on future episodes. We'd love to hear from you with your suggestions for discussion topics or ideas for future guests. And if you really love what you hear, please do consider leaving us a 5-star review, as this helps to get the podcast out to a wider audience. Sit back and enjoy the Stronger for Business podcast.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of the Stronger for Business podcast. I'm in the driving seat today for the first time. The first time I'm leading a podcast. It's really exciting. I'm a little bit nervous as well. So for those of us that have been, or for those of you that have been listening to the podcast so far, you probably know that it's quite fluid in its structure. But we always tend to start with looking back at what's happened for us over the last week. We talk about a topic today, and the topic today is talking about what is the future for face-to-face learning now that a lot of us have found ourselves in this virtual world. And then we'll close up with some reflections on our learning, and then we'll move on into the future. So, hi Bev, hi Pete, how are you?
Hi Dev, I'm well, thank you.
What have you been up to, Bev?
So this week, do you know what? I haven't been out the house, I don't think. Not even for my daily walk, which is quite shocking. Do you know what? I'm finding it all a little bit confusing at the minute. A few weeks ago, it was very easy to know what we were meant to be doing. Mm-hmm. In the UK, it was stay home, stay safe. And now the certain restrictions have been lifted. I feel I've got a little bit of anxiety actually about going outside and getting it wrong, mm-hmm. which is silly. I don't have any anxiety about going out and catching coronavirus. That'll happen if it happens, but I just got a little bit of anxiety around it's a different world out there, and I think bizarrely I'm kind of staying in because it feels safe to be in my little office here, and I can still chat to people on Zoom, but I need to get over this. I've never ever had social anxiety, so yeah, a bit of a strange week for me, I think.
Yeah, what about you, Pete?
Yeah, I think what you say, Bev, is going to be very, very common, very prevalent. I've had a bit of a strange week myself as well. I realised I posted on LinkedIn. It's Friday. I posted on LinkedIn today. It's the first time in God knows how long that I've posted on LinkedIn. So it's the first time this week. So for all the previous weeks of lockdown for the past 10, 12 weeks, I've been posting every day on LinkedIn, coming up with content. And today's the first time this week, which is incredible, really. So it goes to show how busy I am. And I've come up with new productivity tools to make sure that I am being productive. But interestingly, it's like I signed them off to say I'm done. So I was thinking, what have I done this week? And I've done so much that it was really hard to try and remember. But very much for me, it's a bit like I'm back in the training room, as you can see from my background.
Oh, wow.
I'm back in the training room. I've got a new shirt, so I've had some new shirts made this week, and I've also had some headshots done as well. So that was quite interesting, and it's been interesting interacting with people more face to face. So I've done quite a bit of interacting face to face with different people, and everyone's take on what they're comfortable with on social distancing. So it's really, really interesting at the moment, going out and starting to do a bit of business again, sort of face to face with people.
Is this a bit of a rebrand then, Pete, for you, is it? Or is it just an update of the wardrobe?
Yeah, so thank you. It is actually a bit of a rebrand. So the business started out as Flagship Trucks. We then ran dual branding with Flagship Trucks and Training, and now we're sort of dropping trucks and training to Flagship because we're going to be doing training still, and obviously still going to it's a massive part of our business. But actually, we're taking on some more consultative work as well around health and safety and human resources. So we're going to be Flagship partners as a bit of a rebrand. That's going to be relaunching later this month, which is probably why my head is all over the place because there's so much to do.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. No, it's brilliant. It's great to see you back in the training room as well. I can't wait to get my foot back into the classroom. So
it's
it's
really exciting.
It's interesting that you're evolving your brand as well. So the business is still reasonably young, isn't it, as a business? But it's interesting that you're evolving the brand and that there's a need to do that, and you're kind of thinking constantly about the future. So it makes sense to you about your kind of proposition as a business, but it makes sense to quite a wide customer group as well.
Yeah. 100%. It's been a really interesting week, which I suppose leads in well to the conversation topic today. So I was here till quite late. We'd previously we'd got a big boardroom table which we used in the training room for people, and a lot of the training we do is practical, particularly first aid. And we'd actually ended up getting rid of the table, and I'd dismantled it. I'd put it away for safekeeping. And actually, I was here till quite late the other day, bringing it back and actually putting it back up because it's a natural social distancing tool.
Barrier,
it's a natural social distancing tool. So it leads in well to the conversation today, Dov.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's funny, Bev, you were talking about the anxiety about going out. I've actually got quite comfortable being at home, and like a lot of people, especially smaller businesses, we can work from home if we choose to. But it's quite interesting about actually what's it going to feel like to go out. And then if you do drive somewhere to the supermarket into a different town, and you go, well, actually everything's still there. Nothing physically has changed in the environment, really, has it? But I was talking to some friends last night because we are planning to go to Italy for 2 weeks. And of course, when all COVID started, Italy was the epicenter, if you like, in Europe, and that was a challenge. We didn't think that we were going to go. We socially distanced in our friends' gardens last night, which is always really weird. You can't shake hands and hug and all that kind of stuff. It's still a little bit weird after all this time. And we're having this conversation about, do we now go on holiday or not? Because it's getting quite time critical because it's about 10 weeks away. We don't know if the airline's going to fly there. We don't know how safe it's going to be on the plane or not. So actually, it's really interesting that we've got to where we are, but now it's a different kind of anxiety about what the next couple of months are going to be like. And actually, are we going to do the right thing? There's lots of people who are absolutely doing the right thing. There's lots of people out there that are potentially not doing the right thing as well. It's just where you find yourself kind of navigate through that. It's really quite a range of emotions again.
That's exactly the problem that I think I've got in my sort of head, this conflict between what if I think I'm doing the right thing, but I go out and I'm chastised in some way for getting it wrong, that there's some sort of protocol or etiquette that I've skipped because I missed one of Boris's or one of his colleagues, 5 o'clock briefings, and I've, because it seems to be changing day by day, and there's just this fear. Maybe I'm just not a rule breaker. I always thought I was a bit of a rule breaker, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I don't like, being put in a position. I think this as well, there's been a lot of griping and division on social media and a lot of almost sort of name calling when people have got it wrong. And there's the whole Dominic Cummings thing, whatever your views on that. Some people think he just made a judgment call based around his family, and maybe it wasn't the best judgment call, but it was done with good intent, and other people are absolutely vilifying him for just being a blatantly flouting the rules. And I think for me, it's that anxiety between, what if I think I'm getting it right and I go out there and I turn into the next Dominic Cummings, and I'm but okay, so I'm a bit over the top there, but there's definitely a bit of a resistance in me, and it's making it harder to get out every day. And I know I need to not let that take hold. I need to kind of move out of that before it becomes an issue, because you two know me. I am not, I don't have social anxiety in any way, shape or form. I have no problem getting out there, and actually I love I love being on the road, and I love going to different places and meeting new people. So it's a bit of a little bit of a challenge for me at the minute. There's a lot going on in the head.
It's interesting. Sorry, isn't it fascinating? Dominic Cummings, we spoke about him 2 weeks ago on the podcast, and he was like,
and then it erupted.
And then it just erupted. I felt like Mystic Meg. I felt so special.
I felt very ignorant when you mentioned his name, because I didn't know his name then, and maybe this whole debacle is to make sure that I understand who he is.
There we go. Exactly. It's all about you, Bev. What I'd say is, we had a supplier come into the training room this week, which was really interesting. A guy called Dan, photographer. We were having some headshots done for the website, for the new website, and Maggie and I were coming in, and it was just, we had to be so thoughtful about how we did it. And he came up to the training room. I'd unlocked it. He came up, set all his equipment up, and then he came down to us, waiting downstairs to say, "I'm ready now." So then Maggie went up and had her photos taken. She came down, and then I went up. And usually we'd have all been in there together, just having a chin wag and have a conversation, and it wouldn't have been any issue at all. And during that time, I spoke to him and said, "How do you feel about things? Because actually we all feel differently. And are you comfortable with this? Is it what you expected?" Because a comment he made to me was, "I'm surprised how many people are here. Our training room's in a big shared building, and there's other businesses here too." And I was quite wary of the fact that I'd said to him that the building's reopened, and that maybe his expectation was that he'd come here and it'd just be us here. So how clearly do we need to communicate with other people now moving forward as to, if they agree to an engagement outside of their home, what the expectation is going to be of how busy that's going to be, and whether they're comfortable with it beforehand? Are we leading them into something that they feel uncomfortable with? It was just something that we were considering and talking about. It's quite interesting.
I think that's really important, because with different people, they might be healthy and not in a high risk group, but they might have some family members, or people that live in their own home, that suddenly potentially and inadvertently we could be exposing them to some risk. And it'd be really embarrassing all around if you invited somebody in and they say, "Well, actually, I can't come in because of X, Y reason," and then, especially in business as well. Yeah, I've got my last virtual beer night with mates next week. We're hoping it'll be the last monthly virtual one. I think, between now and this time next month, I think it could be very, very different again. So should we crack on with the topic then? Because we've kind of danced around.
Diversified a bit.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, but we've kind of danced around a little bit. But it's all relevant. So, like we said, today's topic is what is the future of face-to-face learning, and is there a future for it? And the topic's been around for a number of years, though. Even when I was in corporate roles, which is 4.5 years ago now, people were talking about it then. And I think to start it off, just to help us context it, and for people listening as well, I did go to some numbers. Pete knows that I like my numbers. We had a podcast which maybe we'll talk about later. So it's these are quite recent numbers. So I've had a look, and it says that online education is estimated to reach $325 billion by 2025. So that's the size of the market globally, and that is a huge amount of money. And since the last kind of financial recession that we had, global workplace training industry was really hit there, face-to-face and virtually as well. But I've looked at different numbers, and of course, depending on which site you look at, there's different numbers, but it's estimated that the size of the e-learning industry, and that's it, that in this broadest sense, is anything between 240 billion and 370 billion US dollars. And that's just the e-learning, virtual learning industry, without everything that happens face-to-face. So it's a huge industry globally, and we are part of that. A lot of our listeners will be part of that, or at least they'll be customers of that as well. So, and interestingly as well, when you do the research, it's almost like face-to-face versus virtual, rather than face-to-face and virtual. So it's almost like the two markets, if you like, are in competition with each other, and in a lot of respects they are, rather than working in collaboration with each other, which is quite interesting. And what's also interesting to observe is there's not a lot of statistics out there for face-to-face. So as an industry, the face-to-face stuff isn't kind of marketing itself and saying this is what we're worth and the value that we add, whereas the the e-learning industry, the virtual industry is highly competitive and very monetized and money orientated, and they are really positioning themselves in the market. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it's just a really interesting observation.
Were those figures related to B2C training or B2B training, or was it not broken down? Because you've got the likes of Udemy. I never know how to say it, Udemy, and those are the sort of learning platforms that are really, they're kind of B2C platforms, aren't they? It'd be interesting to know what the breakdown between of that sort of number is in terms of business training and personal training.
Yeah,
what I would also have loved to have seen, and I must admit, I'm sorry guys, I've been really remiss. I haven't had a lot of chance to do any research around today, so you're just going to get my opinion with absolutely no backing whatsoever. But it would be really interesting to look at the effectiveness in terms of, I mean, whenever you deliver any kind of learning, the objective is to create change in some way, whether that's a change in skill level, a change in knowledge, a change in behavior. Ultimately, I think it's that behavior change that we're looking for, and it would be interesting to know the effectiveness of purely online learning on behavior change.
Yeah, well, it's interesting actually, because I've read with an open mind what people have been writing. And it's interesting because the people who are writing blogs and websites, especially providers, have got a very strong case for virtual learning. But there are some spurious claims out there as well about how beneficial it really is. And I read that social learning, so this is people learning from each other, but in a virtual environment, and in that traditional environment as well, accounts for about 75% of informal learning. And I think that's something to talk about as we go through this podcast, is, virtual learning in its broader sense. It's not just sitting in front of an e-learning module, clicking next, answering a few questions. It's the whole kind of social learning and online collaboration and things like that as well. But there's one line which I read literally just before we started the podcast, and it says, the social learning, like group learning and face-to-face interactions, is now very outdated. And
oh, really?
Yeah, I thought, well, that's quite a big claim. So maybe we can start to pick through that, because that is the subheading, I suppose, for the subject of today.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said earlier about the idea that there's almost this sort of us and them around virtual learning and face-to-face learning. And, for me personally, I think I learn best when there's a more blended approach. So a blend of virtual learning and face-to-face. But I think for me, the benefit of face-to-face, and I will always be an advocate of face-to-face. I totally disregard that last comment that you read out. Mm-hmm. The benefit for me in face-to-face is the time outside the classroom rather than the time just inside it. It's the coffee breaks, and if you're on maybe a residential course, it's the meeting up with your fellow delegates in the bar later on, and it's that reinforcing of what you've learned through conversation. That I don't have a percentage for it, but I would say the percentage is high in terms of the learning, where the learning comes from, whether it's from the sitting in the classroom or actually the peripheral learning, if you like, that you get from the interactions with the other people on the course. And I think, that blended approach with some virtual learning and some face-to-face, it's a broader way to meet all of those different learning preferences as well, isn't it? If you've got people who need a little bit more time, the e-learning is brilliant because you can go over it again and again and again until it's embedded in you, which you can't necessarily do if you've got a one-day workshop. If you switch off for 5 seconds and you've lost the thread, and you don't want to put your hand up and say, I switched off, I've missed all that. At least with e-learning, you can kind of go back and reinforce it. So I hope and pray that face-to-face learning isn't dead, not just because, I quite enjoy delivering it, but also I think there's so much more to be gained from that sort of face-to-face and those interactions that you don't get through a Zoom call, or through that kind of virtual training, even if it's live virtual training.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Pete? Because you're just saying that you brought your big table back into your
So do you know what? It's quite exciting to see what's going to happen. Really, I think to give people a little bit of background with the training that we deliver. So we've been doing blended training for a long time, and we've got a suite of online e-learning courses which are predominantly sort of health and safety and mandatory oriented, but there are some business skills in there. Now, from a first aid point of view, we've been doing blended learning for a while. Both the mandated paediatric Ofsted registered first aid training for paediatric staff, so whether that be teachers or nursery staff, carers, childminders, etc. Their 12-hour course for Ofsted approval historically would be 2 days in the classroom, and a lot of our competitors still offer that, but we have been in a position for a while now where we've offered a blended course where it's only 1 day in the classroom to reduce contact time, and an online course. Now, they've loved that for ages with us, because from a productivity point of view, that supports their productivity in their businesses, because they need less time away. They can do the online course at a time convenient to them, and then they come in and then we do practical skills with them, which we need to do face to face. And that isn't changing. The Resus Council, from a first aid point of view, have been very, very clear that first aid needs to be practiced in person and needs to be done. So it's interesting. We've been doing it for a while from a blended point of view. With our driver CPC training, that was always mandatorily face-to-face. However, the DVSA approved that about 2 months ago at the beginning of lockdown. They approved that for going online and going virtual via Zoom. And the feedback is that that's gone okay. And it came up for review this week. It was up for review, and they've now authorised it indefinitely online. However, they are also looking at bringing it back into the classroom too. So it's very, very interesting for us to see what's happening. When it initially came out as a potential for Zoom, I decided against it because I felt it was temporary, and actually the businesses that I cater to weren't in a position to be able to invest with all the uncertainty. They had a lot of overhead, staff furloughed, etc., and it felt wrong for me to then go and say that I'll deliver the training that I did previously and do it via Zoom. So I stepped out of that and said, I'll wait for it to go back into the classroom. However, I'm now in a position where things are returning to normal, but actually that is now an option indefinitely. So that is something that I need to explore. But interestingly, I've been going through, so we're ready for training. We've actually got our first face-to-face training next Tuesday for first aid. Usually in a first aid setting, you're allowed up to 12 people. Next week, we've got 2. We've only got 2 in a room, which would normally have 12. So it's a very safe place to start. And the benefit we've got is they're both from the same company. So they're colleagues who would normally be working together anyway. And we're going to their location. We've trained there previously. But just to give you guys a picture of the risk assessment that I've done to do that, there's several steps that have had to change from what we would do normally. So we've introduced a 2-metre distancing rule. There's now a PPE kit for all the delegates that they need to have. All the first aid delegates will also receive their own bandage and dressing kit, which we would have shared previously. I've had to increase the accessibility to hand washing facilities. We've amended ways of working to ensure physical distancing is observed. For example, putting the desk back up, putting the tables back up, and using that as well. We're also looking at plastic roller banners, see-through roller banners. So they're a fantastic solution for training because they're movable and wipe downable, but people can still see through them. So we're exploring that as a solution at the moment as well. Amended ways of working to ensure physical distancing is observed. We've got temperature checking, so we've just invested in the forehead scanners. We've gone from paper to paperless documentation, so they're going to have to bring up their own smart device to be able to do the test and the exam. And there's going to be no physical handouts. And then I've had to put a process in place for cleaning down all the equipment after use. And obviously we've got the reduced capacity overall. So there's quite a bit going on. So then I look at it from a business point of view as well. First aid, for example, is very competitive. I've now increased my overheads per delegate. and I've decreased my capacity significantly. Now, from a pricing point of view, I'm on a day rate with this place that I'm going to train at on Tuesday, but actually moving forward, I need to work out how I'm going to manage that from an open course point of view as well. So it's very, very topical, really. I think certainly for us at the moment, face-to-face training is going to continue. Again, we've always explored that there's online solutions too. And actually, I think in reality, my position is I think that there's going to be both, but I do think we're going to reduce face-to-face learning. I think that is a long-term outcome. And I think that, you know, a good example would be we've got online courses, for example, which cover the theory around even professional development courses, for example, around presentation skills, for example. I've got a presentation skills online learning, which could be delivered as pre-work to a course, which could then reduce a longer course to a shorter contact, face-to-face contact, and maybe smaller groups because the theory's been done prior, and therefore it's all about the implementation in the face-to-face. So, yeah, interesting times. Sorry, I've gone on, but
no, that's really good.
We're living it right now. You know, it's mad, really.
I think that, you know, what you've just talked about there is so relevant because, you know, when we're trying to price training, pricing is always the trickiest thing anyway. And I think sometimes it's difficult for clients to understand why the price of training is often as it is, because they see you there for 3 hours, they look at an hourly rate, but we don't train on an hourly rate. That's, you know, we might be stood in front of the class for 3 hours, but that doesn't include the hours of prep that's gone into it, and in your case, obviously the overheads of having to put all those extra sort of risk factors in place. Risk factors? Anti-risk factors?
Preventative action. It's preventative measures, isn't it? Preventative to risks.
Better way to put it. Which brings me on to kind of another question really about the pricing around virtual versus in-person training. Should there be a difference in price? Because ultimately, you won't have obviously travel costs and subsistence costs or anything like that to tag on to the cost of the training, but ultimately the content is still the same. It still takes as long to prepare, it still takes as long to research it, but there seems to be this feeling that we need to reduce our prices when it's virtual training. What are your thoughts?
I think the discussion point here to elaborate, I guess, is that we have a choice, don't we? Whether it's virtual, whatever that looks like. I always feel sorry. I feel really rude because I'm sat in the living room. The postman passes me every time I do this podcast, and he waves, and he's a really nice guy. But I'm really trying to focus on the session. So next time I see him, I'm going to say I'm not being rude, but I'm just focusing because I'm recording a podcast.
Maybe you should invite him on as a guest.
We could do that. I would still have to socially distance, though. That's the problem. Maybe get one of those plastic screens you were talking about, Pete. So going back to the topic is. The fact that, you know, we have a choice whether it's face-to-face, the traditional learning, or whether it's virtual, is that do we have an off-the-shelf product or do we have something tailored? And the price point of those things, I think, should be different. And, you know, there is definitely a time when you have off-the-shelf, you know, like so some Pete's sessions, I've seen them, I've sampled them, it's really good quality. And those are off the shelf, and that's fine for some people, but for other people, it needs to be a little bit more tailored. So I think, you know, as you would be, with, you know, if you are a traditional provider and you're delivering something that's fairly standard, and the client or the customer doesn't want it to be tailored, then that might have a different price point. So I suppose it's very easy to say for this it'll be this price, for that it'll be that price. My view is we should nearly always tailor to the content, so the context of the organisation that we're working in. But, you know, if you're doing something like, as an example, a health and safety e-learning module, where it's talking about, let's say lifting, as an example, that is what it is wherever you go. And that doesn't need to be tailored because you're just complying to your country's health and safety legislation, essentially. So, you know, so that doesn't need to be tailored. But I think when you're talking, especially like Bev, you were talking earlier about behavior change, that behavior changes within the context of that company or that business or that organization, and the culture that's in there as well. So that's not an easy question to answer, I don't think.
Well, I was thinking more of like for like. So if you're delivering exactly the same content, but you're delivering either virtually or face to face, so the content is exactly the same, it's just the delivery method that's different. There seems to me to be an expectation that the price for that virtual delivery will be lower than face-to-face delivery, taking away any of the sort of the peripheral costs, the travel and overnight subsistence and that kind of thing. So I think my question was really about like for like. I get exactly what you're saying. If it's off the shelf, then you would expect it to not be as expensive as a tailored, bespoke training package. But ultimately, I'm talking about just the same content, but delivered in via two different mediums. So my thoughts are the price should be the same, because you're delivering the same outcome. Or and I guess the question is a bit deeper than that, is can you affect the same outcome virtually as you can face to face, and therefore is the outcome going to be as good virtually, in which case should the price reflect that?
And you don't pay just for that 1 hour or 3 hours prep, you're paying for the experience of the individual or the company that's providing that. So as an example, most providers, either individually or collectively, have got a number of years experience behind them, which allows them to do that effectively. So you're not just paying for that, okay, I'm going to buy you for 1 hour or 3 hours or whatever it might be. You're actually buying the experience and the skill that comes with that as well. Because when you're creating or curating content, whether that's virtual or face-to-face, there's still skill, there's still overheads from the provider's perspective. But if you're designing e-learning content, and you're doing that well, or video content and mobile content, whatever it might be, there's still skill that needs to be, you're paying for the skill and the experience as well. So I think it's a really good question.
There's so many constituent parts, isn't there, to development and training. So you've got the IP element, which is what we're contributing to whatever that course material is when it's being written, and you've got, that's a cost. I believe that's a cost that should be charged for. That's IP that we know, as well as any research that is required to complete that. And then on top of that, we've also got the consideration of the person's experience as well. And the only thing the only tangible thing that in my head to liken that to is when you go for someone for public speaking, there's public speakers out there that charge £20,000 a speech, £50,000 a speech, £10,000 a speech, etc. And at some point they've had to decide on that based on their experience, what's happened to them, the results they've had, etc. And none of that changes whether we're virtual or not. And I've been in a position recently where the driver CPC training has gone online, and I've seen my competitors drop their per person prices, whilst also being impacted by capacity, because the perception is that if you go online, the benefit you've got is you can increase capacity because you're not bounded by a classroom. However, they were bounded by the legislation and they dropped their prices, and it was just absolutely ridiculous when you look at them being capped at 5 people per day, and then the prices they were dropping to per person. I couldn't employ a trainer to be able to do that, and absolutely not at all. And so I think there is as Bev quite rightly says, I think we perceive there's an expectation around our clients expecting a reduced rate. And at the moment I'm in the process where I'm tendering for mental health training, and we've got an off-the-shelf training solution which I can deliver either virtually or in person, and they're very keen to have that for understandable reasons as well, particularly with mental health. They want that in person, where if at all possible. Now it's very, very important, that interactional part, but actually in the face-to-face learning, is it us as trainers? So here's a question, us as trainers, because if there's a perception that we should charge less if we're virtual, yes, we've not got the cost of a room, for example, but often we're training in-house at other people's locations, so we've not got the cost of that anyway. Now, if there's a benefit to learning face to face, that's normally driven by the other delegates in the room and them sharing experiences, which is actually not something that we're bringing. We're bringing the ability to make them to interact. Mm-hmm. So actually, should there even be a price difference at all? And in my opinion, I don't think there should.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think there should either. I think
we're all aligned on that then.
No, I think if you're delivering in person, it's very different if you've got an e-learning package, it's pre-recorded package, it's a click and learn, click and watch. But if you're there as a trainer or a facilitator, facilitating the learning, whether that's virtual or whether that's in person, the quality of the outcome is really, I think, what is important. And you talked about IP, and the skill of the facilitator is what I think is most important. I do think there is an element of learning lost from virtual training, that it's that sort of intangible. It is, as I said earlier, it's the learning that happens outside of the classroom, during lunch break, tea break, and that kind of thing. And I don't know that you can always get the same level of interaction on a video call as you can, because you're missing some of the nuances, you're missing some of the body language, you're missing some of the side conversations that go on. Yes, you can put people into syndicate rooms or meeting rooms and do things that way, but as a facilitator, if you've got people in small groups, you can see, you're kind of picking up things all of the time, whereas I don't think you've got that virtually. So I think I'm just talking myself around to thinking that maybe it shouldn't be the same price, and that's worrying me. Yeah, but there's a lot of things sort of that are you're picking up as a facilitator in the classroom that I think you possibly lose virtually.
I just want to go back.
Still given as much.
Yeah, I'll go back to the point that Pete just talked about cost, and I think there's a real danger potentially that regardless of who the provider is or how they go about doing that, we end up going into a price war. And I think that'd be really dangerous. So as you guys know, and some of the listeners will know as well, so I spent a long time in the holiday industry. And during the time I was in there, it was like, the whole industry, like a lot of other industries, goes into a price war. And we all know what happens with, if it's in retail, there's always 3 or 4 sales a year. And now we've been influenced in the UK, as a lot of the rest of Europe has, around the kind of Black Friday, but was it a month before Christmas? And all the prices crash and then they go back up again. But then all the, what used to be the New Year sales now start happening the day after Christmas in the UK. So nobody's really buying anything at full price anymore, which has really hit the retail industry massively, because they went into a price war with each other. And the problem is once one starts, everybody else has to do it. So the consumer wins, or are they, I guess. But, as an industry, and then again, go back to the holiday industry, prices were getting slashed quite heavily. So in the UK, traditionally holidays would get sold after New Year, and then prices would get slashed quite heavily. And one business started to do that, and then everybody else had to compete. And then all of a sudden, for margin, then for the businesses, then really gets squeezed. But I think also then when your margin is squeezed, your quality of your product is getting squeezed as well. So I think initially the consumer, the customers potentially might win because the fees they're paying come down, but actually the quality of the learning in the longer term then gets reduced as well. So I think that's a real red flag for the industry and for the customers as well. That if we start getting into a price war about, regardless of what it is or how it's delivered, I think that's something to be aware of. In my previous job role, I had a sizable training budget. It was a 6-figure training budget that I was responsible for. And I'm not tight. Some people might say I'm quite tight. My family might say prudent is a much better word. I'm cautious, and we nearly always finish the year just about clearing the amount every year. But you have to be quite careful. And it's interesting. Peter was talking earlier about so especially for your mandatory compliance kind of learning, and all businesses need to have qualified first aid people within their organisation. So there might be an expectation that the fees or for whatever it might be coming down as we go into a virtual world. But the reality might be, if I was in a corporate again and I had a training budget, actually my cost for first aid training might actually now be going up, particularly in the short term, maybe for the rest of this financial year, because I can only put 2 people on a first aid training course rather than 8, maybe.
Oh yeah, I'm doubling my prices. Unfortunately, that's what I've got to do. And even then, the margin, I've done a cost analysis. Even then, the margin isn't going to be as good as it was before, because when you're charging per person, it's driven by capacity.
Can we re-say that a little bit? The screen froze, Pete. So from when you said I'm doubling my prices, can you go back to that and we'll edit that bit in?
Okay. So I'm doubling my prices, and the reason for that is that because we've got an increased cost per person, but it's mostly due to capacity. When we've had to reduce to a third capacity, even by doubling, if I do a cost analysis, I'm still going to be challenged by that. But I think what I need to be most careful of is how well I communicate that to my clients who are buying, because I think they'll understand. I believe the right clients will understand that that's what they need to do to get quality training, and that's the challenges that we now face as an industry. But I think my concern is I feel that particularly your concerns will be, and the concerns for any trainer is that other people who are also tendering for that business probably haven't considered the impact that it can have on everyone if we start to slash costings and pricing, and it has an impact on the overall marketplace.
Yeah. It is about holding your nerve, I think, and having absolute confidence and faith in the ability to provide the outcome, and therefore holding your nerve on the price and not overcharging. I'm not talking about being ridiculously greedy. I don't mean that, but being realistic about the cost and the benefit, and the transition or the transformation that your training can create. And I think there is a danger that people are going to panic and feel like they have to start cutting their prices, especially if it is going more virtual. And like you say, Dev, everything kind of gets reduced and reduced and reduced, but quality has to suffer at the end of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it will go full circle. I'm sure it will. If that does happen, it will go full circle. But it would be so much better if we could avoid that drop in quality and have people hold their confidence in the pricing that they're charging. And as you say, Pete, being able to clearly articulate the reason why we're not going to drop prices, because we can't. Because we can't. If we want to stay in business, we've got to be realistic about what we charge. And also, I think there's a tendency that if we do start dropping our prices, we devalue the quality of the training anyway.
And for our customers as well, is when they for many they'll be in a new financial year now, and for most organizations and businesses, training is one of the first things that gets cut. I mean, training in its broadest sense, like marketing and communications and things like that, which is absolutely counterproductive from an organizational development perspective. But that's the way that it is, because it's an easy way to save money. But I think for future planning, because people, as we go into the summer, we'll be kind of halfway through the year, financial year, and then start to forecast what they might need to spend in the future as well. So I think there's like many things at the moment, there's lots of things to think about when you start to forecast from your business spend. If you have a learning and development budget or whatever it might be, and maybe start to talk to your suppliers and thinking, what do you see are the challenges going to be for the future, rather than maybe sitting there independently thinking, right, I've got my spreadsheet in front of me, I'm sitting with my finance partner. And sometimes, again, you need a kind of crystal ball, because you don't always know what it is that you need to be spending your money on in the future. But maybe for corporate customers or organizations, actually start talking to your suppliers and start to think about, what are the challenges? What is it I need to consider as part of my financial planning for my training budget in the future? Because it'll change, maybe not massively, but where you spend now, you might not be spending there, you might be spending somewhere else. So will the budgets need to increase or decrease or stay the same? I don't know, but probably just have those conversations, I think, for the longer term, for the next financial year and the year after that.
I suppose I think there's a danger that the number crunchers look and go, oh, we can have this virtually and it's going to cost us much less than having it face to face. Let's just look at the numbers and not actually looking at the transformation or the change that they're actually looking to get. And I'm guessing that's always been the case, hasn't it?
Yes, it has been. So shall we use this opportunity then to move away from the finances, because I think we're comfortable that we've raised that red flag, and then start to think about actually, what is the value or return on investment, if you like. Going back to the question, is there will there be a place for face-to-face in learning in the future, and is it one versus the other, or is it those two things, depending on the need, I guess, because that's something I always used to talk about, is that somebody said, we have to do this training for my team or my department or this function. So my question is, why? Going back to the why question, why do you need to do it? What is the need? Do you want to do it? But actually, let's just get into the detail and actually understand what the need is.
Yeah, and I do like the fact that I think the whole lockdown COVID-19 stuff has got people thinking in a different way. It's got people more comfortable with technology. It's got trainers and facilitators more comfortable with the online environment. It's got attendees more comfortable with that platform. So I think in terms of how we look at training going forward, I think there's definitely a place for both. I genuinely think there is still a need for face-to-face training, but I think there's a great opportunity to be more innovative in the way that we deliver the content. So maybe we don't need to be going in, if we've got a 6-month program, maybe we don't need to be going in every month. Maybe we can do a blend of both. I mean, I did my degree a few years ago with Edinburgh Napier University, and they used to send a lecturer down once a month to do a workshop, but actually we had another lecturer who did everything online, and I'm talking 5 or 6 years ago, and the university had it was a work-based degree and they had that down brilliantly. But I think looking back, we needed both, and interestingly, as a cohort, we formed our own study group because of that social learning, that outside of the classroom learning that you get. So I think my hope is that we won't go from one extreme to the other. We will innovate and create a blend of both, which is already being done, but maybe more trainers and facilitators and companies and businesses will embrace that blended approach.
Yeah, I had on LinkedIn, this advert came up. It was only yesterday, actually, with one of the major universities in England offering a high impact leadership course. The price point was about £2,500 plus VAT, probably, for something like a 60-day course, probably about 8 to 10 hours a week of study time. And it was very valid. It looked great. It's very nicely packaged, as you'd expect. But I thought to myself, so we're talking about leadership, but you're doing that by yourself. And there's
theory, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is an irony in there, because when you are a leader, you're not leading things, you are leading people. And it wasn't ridiculously expensive, because it was giving you an insight into leading high impact leading in today's world. So it talked about VUCA environments and things like that as well. But for me, the concern is that can you learn to be a leader when you're not having those kind of discussions? And it doesn't have to be residential, and it doesn't have to be a whole day, or the more traditional 5 days away in a hotel or whatever it might be. But I'm just wondering how transferable, because this is what we talk about when you're learning, is how we transfer that learning and apply that learning, and how sticky is the learning, I guess is the term, and how useful is a 60-day course on leadership when you're not actually talking with other leaders. And that is, and that's not a criticism. I think it's just a question. But then to balance that out, again, a bit of research that I've read up on today says e-learning can boost knowledge retention between 25 and 60%. And I don't doubt that, but I suppose it depends what e-learning that is. I've certainly done compliance e-learning before, where it's the same thing every year, and you just click the button because you know the answer, because you do it every year. and you don't learn anything from that. Well, you could say there is knowledge retention there, but it's not you're not learning anything new. You're just doing it because you have to do it for compliance reasons. But there's other e-learning which can be really interesting and really creative as well. But I suppose it's going back to why are we doing the learning, and actually thinking about what the outcomes are at the start of the design or the commission, or whatever it might be, and actually understanding what is it that we really want to get out of that learning, regardless of whether it's face-to-face, mobile, social, or a blend of all of those things. Can you believe we're at the hour mark already? We are. Very nearly. Wow. So
it flies by, doesn't it?
This is probably one of the quickest hours of the week. Probably because there's just so much to talk about in all the content. There is just so much to talk about. So should we talk about really quickly then? What have we learned this week? Who'd like to start? Who'd like to start?
Go on, Bev. Ladies first.
Thank you very much. Do you know, I was racking my brains. I think we're learning stuff all the time, but the thing that sticks in my mind is really, I was on a Zoom call earlier this morning with the School of Facilitation, and what I learned was some of the tricks, I suppose tricks is the wrong word, techniques that you can use to enhance the experience of the learner using virtual learning platforms like Zoom. So I'm not talking about e-learning, as such, but how you can make your presentation online much more dynamic, much more interesting. And there was things that sort of plugins that you can use, like second cameras to add interest. And I think that the one thing I kind of picked up from it more than anything was the need for interest and visual interest online, I think, is so much greater than it necessarily is face-to-face. My slides in a face-to-face setting are really, they're not there to detract from me. They're there just as a bit of a visual prompt. Whereas I think online, you need that sort of visual stimulus to keep people interested more so than you do face-to-face. So it's got me thinking about how I design. If I'm honest, when I've delivered virtual training, it's been almost a sort of I pick up my slide deck from the face-to-face sessions and move them online. And I think there's a difference in how we need to be presenting information online. So that was my learning. I'm going to go away and sort of review some of the ways that I deliver online training and try and hopefully make it a bit more visually interesting. And
I think that's a key point, and conversations I've had with L&D specialists and providers as well recently is, virtual learning is not necessarily taking your face-to-face content and moving that online. It's a different skill. It's fundamentally the content might be the same, but how you do that, I think there's a whole new skill base for external providers like ourselves, but also internal L&D teams. There's going to be a whole new thing to learn about how we do that, because it's not a lift and drop into a different way of doing it, different platform. There's a whole new skill base to learn as well.
How exciting is that, though?
Very exciting.
How exciting is that to learn new skills about something we've been doing for so long anyway? I love that.
And not be frightened or threatened by it as well, but just take it as part of our own CPD too. Cool. Pete, what have you learned?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a further paradigm shift, because it's something that I've been thinking about, and that was as I've been tendering for more mental health training, and that is, we were bounded when we do classroom training and we do it a distance away. We are bounded by delivering in times of days at a time, and I think actually we can deliver virtually if we shift our mindsets and we shift that of the clients as well, depending on what they need. But actually we could deliver more regular, shorter, sharper lessons and classes and training and development, and we're not bounded by outcomes of a day or half a day anymore. Those learning sessions could be completely changed, and we are unbounded by distance.
Is this actually happening, or is this something that you're sort of hoping for? Is that change already happened?
no, this is something that I'm exploring in a tender proposal that I'm putting forward now.
Okay, brilliant.
Around mental health training. So rather than it being the traditional, I compete. I make no bones about it. I compete with the mental health first aid solution, which is what's out there currently for many companies, and many companies are choosing that, which follows the format of 2 days, 1 day, half day. And I think that that certainly that is now being lifted and pushed into a virtual setting. And I think that actually a mental health solution would be much better being half-hour sessions, hour sessions over a prolonged period of time to develop people and develop thinking over a period of time. And that's something that I'm putting forward as a proposal, which I know that my competitors can't compete with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
what about you, Dyf?
Sorry, just on Pete really quickly. I think that kind of just in time for time poor, cash poor companies is going to be really, really important. It kind of, and also because it's virtual as well as anytime, any place, anywhere. And I think that's, whether you're a provider or you're internal, I think that's definitely the way to go, regardless of whether that's virtual or face-to-face. For me, in a similar vein for you two, actually, is the amount of research that's been done in the last 11 weeks. So many people are learning so much at the moment, maybe because they've got the time, but also as well, research bodies and organizations and businesses are really looking at themselves and really challenging, but also there's a lot of data coming out of that as well. So it's really fascinating, the amount of reports and studies that are coming out and support information. So my learning this week is kind of like dredging as much information, just that, I'm really throwing my net wide, if you like, and then kind of hoarding in all that information. There's probably too much information out there to digest properly, but it's really interesting to actually be part of that journey somehow, and learn about what's going on, and then hopefully then in the future my customers will benefit from that learning as well, because I learn, I'll change, and it'll support learning and change for them too.
There's lies, damn lies, and statistics, don't you?
Yes, yeah, I do. Yeah,
Careful,
you take everything with a pinch of salt. Yeah, but but if enough people are saying a similar thing, then there's got to be some truth in that, I guess. Okay, cool. So we're coming towards the end of the podcast. Any final or closing thoughts from anybody about what we're up to? All we done for this week?
Just amazed we're into June already, and after all the lovely weather, I had my log burner on last night and a blanket over my legs.
I'm looking out the window and it's pouring with rain, and I've got to go and collect some fixed bikes, which is very disappointing because I was looking forward to getting out on my bike and I don't really fancy it. I even got hailed on last night walking the dog, and it's
What
June.
is going on?
Crazy weather.
What's going on? But the lockdown tan's still there, so fine.
Yeah, it's not washed off yet. Okay, cool. Thanks for joining us again this week, everybody. Remember that you can listen to us on lots of different platforms. Remember to subscribe and share with everybody else. We will talk with you again next week. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Stronger for Business podcast. A final thought before we go. In the words of Henry Ford, anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. So, stay young and join us next Friday for our next episode of the Stronger for Business podcast.